And thank you for joining our workshop, Widening Your Professional Lens from Young to Old, Reframing Aging in ADR. We're especially grateful to the DRC, a model for so many other circuits, jurisdictions, and provinces. And again, are so pleased with your participation today. My name is Linda Fieldstone, and I'm the co-chair of the Elder Justice Initiative on Elder Caring Coordination. I'm formerly supervisor of family court services in the 11th Judicial Circuit, but I have since widened my lens to work with older families in conflict about the care and safety of an older adult. I'm delighted to work with Brianne Standback today, whose perspectives of ageism, research, and work supporting older adults teaches me something every time we talk together. So thank you, Brianne, as well.
Oh, well, thank you, Linda, and thank you everyone for attending. As Linda said, my name is Brianne Standback, and I'm a gerontologist at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I've spent many years interested in ageism and culture and age, and so I'm delighted to be here today. Like Linda, I've recently widened my own lens, stepping into a role as Director of Community Engagement for the Cognitive Aging Lab at USF, where I work directly with organizations that support older adults and older adults themselves all around the central part of Florida. So welcome today, and we're so glad you're here to learn with us.
So we all have some experience with older adults, and you may, like me, even be an older adult. But we are wondering what your professional experience with older adults may be. Can you post in the chat, are you an elder mediator? Do you mediate estate issues? Are you an elder law attorney, gerontologist, mental health professional that works with older adults, an attorney who has older clients? It's okay if you don't have any experience specifically on that. Our journey today, we'll be discussing the takeaways that are here about ageism, ethical considerations, and modifications that we can use in our own practices to help us work with older adults. Please check out the materials after the presentation. So as we hope that they'll be helpful for you as well. And if you have any questions, let us know. They're trying to set up our chat, so we'll be able to respond back with you. So we just want you to think for a minute. We thought maybe today we could start out by each honoring someone for the legacy we are continuing. Think of someone in your life at any time that you consider old. Someone you know or knew personally, maybe a grandparent, aunt or uncle, even if only through the stories you heard about them when you were growing up. Or someone that you read about or know about that touched you in some way. Think of how this older person influenced you. What do you carry forward from them, like a gift they passed down through the generations? So as you bring this older person into our journey, think about your own perceptions of age. How did they emerge, and how did they change throughout the years? What are generalizations, for instance, about aging that may or not have been true as you grew up? Notice your definition of old. Where did that come from? Remember when you were 4 or 6 and anyone that was older than 30 was a dinosaur? Please post in the chat, what's a generalization about aging you learned that may or may not have been true?
Linda, we've got tons of great things coming in on the chat with lots of experience, lots of people of all ages, some people checking this out for the first time. So lots of different varieties of people engaged with older adults and in aging.
So why don't we start and talk about what is ageism, Brianne?
So I wanted to present the World Health Organization definition of ageism from 2021. Ageism is stereotypes, how we think, prejudice, how we feel, discrimination, how we act towards other or oneself based on age. And I want to spend a second on that oneself piece. I think that sometimes when we talk to older adults about ageism, they themselves are, living out some ageist myth or subscribing to an ageist myth. And so it is as much what other people do as what individuals believe based on age. Originally in 1973, scholars named Butler and Lewis described ageism as a process of systematic stereotyping of and discrimination against people because they are old, just as racism and sexism accomplish this for skin color and gender. Old people are categorized as senile, rigid in thought and manner, old-fashioned in morality and skills. Ageism allows the younger generations to see older people as different than themselves. Our own ageism can affect us as well. And so we want to think about the ways in which ageism impacts our health, our quality of life, and financially what the implications may be too. We know that ageism can lead to premature death by 7.5 years. It decreases physical and mental health. It creates longer recovery from disability. Ageism increases the likelihood of engaging in risky health behaviors. It reduces quality of life, and $63 billion are annually spent to pay for conditions due to ageism. So whether in the chat or whether sitting behind your computer, think about, have you ever experienced ageism or witnessed ageism? What happened? What did you think? And remember, ageism works in both directions. For instance, were you ever denied an opportunity because you were too young? Somebody said you weren't ready? That, in fact, is also ageism. So, Linda, how does ageism work within families?
So, first of all, ageism is important to all of us because all of us here in some way are working with families, and we are all part of a family, and most of all, we are all aging. So the quality of our healthier, active years is generally expanding for most of us while we age, meaning the older we get, the older we can hope to be. Aging is a universal process, and so it spans all borders. What else about aging do you want to bring up here, Brianne?
I think you made the most important point about the fact that we are all aging. I would also just point out that in that aging process, it's going to look different for everyone. And so avoiding large generalizations is really important, as well as seeing some aspects of aging as inevitable. Certainly, we are all going to get gray hair and our skin is going to wrinkle, but there are other changes that are sometimes associated with aging that we are all not going to experience. And I think that that's a very important thing to remember. And they certainly then ripple out into families and ripple out into our communities for how we perceive aging and older adults.
So our own point of view at any given moment is a composite of all the family influences we've had, caregiver behaviors, culture, family composition. As time moves on, we bring all of that with us. So some questions come to mind. How is getting older perceived in your family and on all of our families? What are some words that you heard about older people? Can you write that in the chat? And as you're writing, think about how your culture may have influenced your views on aging. So are older adults in your culture revered, or are they kind of cast away? How about religion? Did that affect your views? Your gender? What happened when people of another culture or religion entered into your family, perhaps through marriage or partnership? New children, did that change anything? Adoption? And how might a caregiver express ageism? Like, think about this, because that's going to directly influence how the older person is feeling about themselves, right? Are they talking to the older adult like they're not there, right? Talking about them instead of with them? Are they assuming what the older person wants rather than asking them? Right? Even if the voice of the older adult is not as strong, they sure will have a way to express that they don't want to shower that night, right? That they don't like what's in front of them to eat. Or are they treating the older adult like a child? And how many times have we heard that older people are just like children? Or the phrase, child is the father of man. No. You're an older person. You are coming in with a whole quality of life that even if you are not able to express that is still deeply who you are, right? So our parents are not our children. We are still always thinking about them as our parent.
And I also think it's important to think about when we all started thinking about people as different ages than us and when that took place. And so typically we start to see children around the age of 3 through the things that are in their worlds, books, TV shows, films they may watch. They're starting to generate their own ideas about aging and in that way too, ageism. And so many of us have held these beliefs for a very long time around aging, in addition to the impacts and influences of our family and culture. We also have our broader American culture too, that informs that. And I think it's important to remember that that starts pretty young. And so when you start thinking about yourself as a younger person, maybe your impressions of aging have changed as you have aged. And had encounters in your life. And I'm seeing some of that in the chat. So I think it's important to bring up.
And thank you for sharing. We appreciate that because we all have a lot to learn from each other.
So
here you go.
There we go. So I put together some things and wondered what you guys thought was true or false here. So we have the first one, about 90% of people will live to be age 65 generally in good health. True or false? And I'll go back through these after I read through a couple. Memory changes begin around the age 25. True or false? About the same number of older adults live in long-term care as young adults live in college residence halls. Again, true or false? And then finally, older adults remain sexually active. True or false? And so, all of the items here that I've read are all true. The only one on the list here that would be false are personality changes occur as a person ages into late life. That's actually false. Our personality remains pretty stable unless something goes wrong in terms of a traumatic brain injury or some other issue with the brain as we get older. And so I think some of these are, especially with job applicants reporting age discrimination and hiring at age 35, we would be surprised by. However, that is true. And so these are just some things to keep in mind. I noticed a lot of people have also put some notes about memory in the chat. And so hopefully, especially when someone is older, if they're just having something happen, that's what we would expect when somebody is aging. You can say, it's not just something that happens to older people. Who raise your hand if you're 25. It starts then.
Here we go. So according to the Population Reference Bureau, I think most of us know here that Florida has the highest percentage of older adults, 21%, followed by the statistic from January 2023 for Maine. So, there may be, these are growing issues with so many people who are getting older where they may need a dispute resolution process. So think about that in terms of your practice. How is this going to affect your practice? How many older people are going to be coming back to you? How many older parents will there be? Whether you are a family mediator or not, is the age of the people that you work with going to continue to get higher? And how will these growing numbers affect the need for dispute resolution for older adults?
And Linda, before we continue on, this slide is interesting because it presents a map of the United States. And if everyone notices, there are different colors here. The darker red represents states that have higher age implicit bias, according to a study in 2020. And so at our time when Florida's aging population is expanding rapidly, we also are ranked as one of the states with the highest age implicit bias. And so I think that this signals that, especially as individuals who are working for and with older adults and their families, it's important to keep ageism in mind. So one of the things that's really important is the fact that modern families have changed also. And I'm sorry about that. My clicking was funny, Linda. So I don't know if I did that backwards and forwards or not, but I hope everyone is focused on modern families now. We've had a lot of evolution of families over the last 50 years. Definitions of family are broader and more inclusive. They may include people who are blood relatives as well as kin relatives or families of choice. We have changing family structures. We have changed from a family tree to a family bean pole. And what the difference is that we have a lot of generations that are growing kind of in a straight line, but there are fewer children in these generations. We have fewer of those branches to make the tree that we are, if we close our eyes and we see that genealogical map, it certainly has a much different structure visually. So it means that children who are born today will probably know their grandparents and great-grandparents, but there will be fewer of them because of advances in late life and people living longer. It's a wonderful thing to have all of those interactions, but the changing family structure certainly changes sometimes caregiving responsibilities, resource allocation, and other things that were, somewhat different when we had the more tree-shaped family. We also have families that are skip generation households. And so we have grandparents that are raising grandchildren and other older relatives raising younger relatives too. Approximately 40% of older adults are raising kin and grandchildren. That translates into 2.7 million children living with grandparents. And many of the support systems to support families and children weren't intended to include kin and grandparents raising these children. We also have family situations involving deployment, death, incarceration, economic adversity, substance use, mental health issues, issues with immigration that also may put younger generations with an older generation for some of their rearing years. The outcomes for children raised by extended family are generally more positive than those that enter foster care. So these grandparents and older relatives are performing a very invaluable service to their families and to these young people. We also have, a lot of aging baby boomers out there. We have a lot of people who are, wanting to live independently and age in place. And for a lot, home is more than just physical shelter. And so we are seeing an expansion of intergenerational households. We're seeing a lot of houses in Florida, for instance, built for that in ways that in other parts of the country, they are less likely to be built that way with that intergenerational household in mind. And so all of this is to paint the picture of that modern family and to expand and widen our lens, to use our title for today, about how we see families.
And so with all these growing number of older adults, it's good to know that the Florida legislators have incorporated their view that public policy is really strong where it concerns that people need different ways to resolve their issues. And they're recognizing the family differences and how important older generations can be with families, even to the extent of grandparent visitation, and how important mediation could be to families to continue involvement of older adults in the lives of the younger generations.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that when we look at the profile of older Floridians, we have 45% male, 55% female that are over the age of 60 and 65. 34% have an associate degree or higher in terms of education. About half of people who are older in Florida are married. We have 5% of grandchildren living with grandparents according to that profile too. And so, you start to then see how our own state builds out in terms of what our profile of older Floridians looks like.
So let's think about how we can widen our lenses as dispute resolution professionals. And the way that we treat older adults and older families in court processes compared to children and younger families with minor age children. So issues within older families aren't even addressed in the family divisions here in Florida. Dispute resolution processes regarding older adults, we need to recognize that those are different, and the training for each of those processes needs to incorporate those differences because older adults are not analogous to children. Elder mediation is not just like family mediation. Elder caring coordination is not mediation on steroids, and it's different than parenting coordination, even though both are based on the same concept that families in higher conflict need a dispute resolution process catered to their unique needs and characteristics. So we look at this further in terms of, I'll just bring up statute 44.407, which became which was enacted in 2021. That elder-focused dispute resolution, they're referring to elder caring coordination for those families in higher conflict, that the legislature recognized that each older adult is unique and deserves access to dispute resolution processes that protect their rights and elevate their voices regarding issues pertaining to their health and well-being. So dispute resolution processes minimize that kind of win-lose mentality that's associated with court actions and help the families contribute to more informed decision-making. Really important, separating their own views from those of the older person. Brianne, how about supporting the autonomy of an older adult in dispute resolution processes? What happens when there are capacity issues?
Sure, that's such a difficult thing when capacity comes into play. I think it's most important to avoid age bias if there is really a question about capacity. Just because a person is old and may have age-related changes doesn't automatically mean that they lack capacity. But here's where it gets complicated, because on the other hand, just because a person is old doesn't mean that there aren't pathological processes taking place like dementia that may challenge a person's capacity. And so I think the key to supporting autonomy is to listen to older adults or to follow wishes that they have indicated to them, indicated by them, in the event that they do become incapacitated. I think that's very, very important. Talking with older adults as opposed to becomes important in this. Some of the older adults that I've had the pleasure of knowing over my career, some knew that they had challenges with capacity, others didn't. I've certainly seen families who thought somebody was incapacitated to learn that they were very much intact. And so it's, I think, always important to let the older adult lead to the best of the ability. And there are some cultural considerations to from that perspective to also weigh, is capacity culturally relevant? Absolutely. There are certainly communities where an older adult remains autonomous regardless of capacity. And so, where we view, illness and other aspects of aging, other cultures see it as life is a fluid process, and this is just one element of it, and it's naturally accepted as part of the aging process. And so it may be incredibly important to examine the role of culture in supporting autonomy of older adults, and you can do that through sort of self-educating, certainly asking people around the older adult and learning about that community, because you might find that they have supports that are sort of set up in place when maybe everybody is looking for Mr. Jones and saying hello to him every day, and he's very integrated into a community, even though he may live semi-independently or independently, and somebody wants to challenge their ability with maybe mild cognitive impairment or some other cognitive change that has taken place. I also know here one of my friends who went on to become a fantastic researcher and gerontologist. Her grandmother lived in Central Florida, blind, in a house that had no HVAC, and had lived there, I think, for probably 70 years. And she had Meals on Wheels that was brought to her. She had a lot of family support, and she remained independent until the end of her life. And so there are ways that we can build from within to help support people's autonomy depending on what their wishes are.
So supporting autonomy, what do our ethical rules say about that in mediation? We know that elder mediation and elder caring coordination both promote self-determination. However, a mediator, for instance, won't hold a session if it's unclear that a party is able to really freely exercise that self-determination. While in elder caring coordination, this plays out differently. An elder caring coordinator is appointed for a period of up to 2 years, and it's not unusual to have a session without the older adult. The purpose of having the elder caring coordinator there, though, is to enhance the older adult's voice, to keep it prominent even if the older adult isn't present. So it's not like just having an empty chair in the room that symbolizes that person. It really is making sure that everybody is able to focus on that person above their unresolved personal issues or vendettas toward each other, so that family members are constantly being encouraged to place the older adult's needs and preferences above their own. Other mediator rules that would apply to this have to do with promoting the awareness that the older adults older adults have interest, again, that is separate, or let me say that if they're not participating, their interests need to be taken into account. That we need to maintain impartiality, though, meaning that we are not, even though we care about the older person, we are not biased. That is one voice that is in the room. We are helping everybody else, though, to take that into consideration. Let's also be aware that in Rule 15.230A for parenting coordination, it says that the parenting coordination process is also an impartial process with the same meaning, freedom from favoritism or bias in word, action, or experience. So we are there to help the family understand what their view and the older view is of the goals that they have together, but being very attuned to the voice of the older adult regarding those matters. Also, in terms of professional competence here, I'm sorry, I am having a difficulty, moving things around here, that in Rule 10.630, it says that a mediator should acquire and maintain professional competence. Okay, and that maintaining professional competence is really important. Parenting coordinators also now have specific obligations for continued education. So I think that we all do recognize that that continued education is crucial for us, and it is in fact why we're attending this conference together. And let's move on. We're looking at Rule 15.220, integrity here. That, again, our biases, our personal values, morals, or religious beliefs are not what's at stake or a factor in our dispute resolution processes. And this is a rule for parenting coordination, but it would apply to mediation and to elder caring coordination as well, that we need to be aware of our own biases and self-interests. We all have them. We can't say we don't have a bias. It's intrinsic to who we are, but it is incumbent upon us to be aware enough to maintain our neutrality, to keep them separate, to understand they may be very different than the values of the families that we are seeing. So elder caring coordination, because I've talked about this a few times, 44.407. Also, the statute talks about multicultural competence in terms of the training that elder caring coordinators have, and at least 4 hours of ethical considerations, because when you are dealing with families in higher conflict, those ethical dilemmas come often into play. These are similar also to the requirements of training for parenting coordinators. So what happens in terms of scheduling? How would that perhaps be affected when we are dealing with older adults? Or skip that even age. How should scheduling be affected in general, whether we're mediators or coordinators?
Yeah, so this is something that I talk about a lot because I think that a lot of the tips that you have for working with older adults certainly are inclusive and things that I think we would all want to experience. I think it's important to allow extra time to interview, meet, and consult with older adults and their families. Scheduling at a preferred time for older adults is really important. One of the things whenever I'm working to schedule is I always think about school drop-offs, school pickups, rush hour, how well lit times that we're available and older adults might be on the road might be, to make sure everybody feels comfortable if they're providing their own transportation. I consider how long meetings are going to go. I consider the location and timing. Is the place going to be really busy? What is the parking like? What is the accessible parking like? How accessible is the building? And communicating that in advance. I always plan breaks, at least hourly and maybe more depending on the needs of individuals in the conversation. In terms of scheduling too, one of the best practices in aging is to provide a reminder call a week out and maybe even the day before of a meeting or an appointment. And that usually comes from a well-trained staff member who is used to working with older adults and families, and can, sort of anticipate some of the questions that might come, and as well as repeat some of the information about sort of how long a person will be there, the location, parking, all of those details. I think it's important to actually talk to someone. A lot of times people are just directed to a website and, all the information you need is here. And that assumes everyone has access to that. And one of the things I think we've learned over the last couple of years is that while plenty of people have become computer savvy and like us are joining together on a platform and can navigate it reasonably well, that's not the case for everyone. That's the same with internet access too. There are a lot of older adults who may still have a feature phone instead of a smartphone, who may be operating an older computer or who have decided they're done with the computer. And so understanding that getting information through different modalities is really important. I also think in terms of scheduling, designing a workflow so that staff who an older adult either is already familiar with, like that person who may have called them for a reminder about their appointment, might meet them at the door, or somebody that they might see throughout an entire process. I think that familiarity is something we all want. We all want to feel like wherever we're going, people kind of know our name and are waiting for us and there to help us. And I think that all falls into this large category of scheduling. I also think too that taking a look at the environment that you're scheduling in can be important. And making sure that you inform about, you'll see a sign when you hit the parking lot that'll have a big arrow on it and it'll direct you to our door. Explaining, we have plenty of restrooms. We have, a couple of, break spaces. That way people have a visual sense of what they're getting into if they're unfamiliar with the environment. And all of this is building to allowing people to feel comfortable to then be part of the proceedings that take place and to really be exercising their right of self-determination. And I know that that's an awful lot to say about scheduling, but I think it makes a big difference.
So let's get practical with all kinds of aspects that the aging process may bring to our practices as dispute resolution professionals. And think about, as we're talking about this, like Brianne had said, in terms of scheduling, you would think about that. These are practical ideas that you need to think about regardless of if a person is aging or not, right? So you may not want to have a mediation session or coordination session first thing in the morning or late in the afternoon for an older person, but still the best thing to do is to ask. And you may also not want to have a meeting early in the morning for a teenager because they're not going to be up and they're not going to make it anyway, right? You'd be better off having it at 11 o'clock at night. Asking is the best way to handle it. And again, if the older person isn't able or equipped to give an answer, their decision maker or a family member will be able to do that. And if the family members don't agree, there's usually a time that you could pick that they could both would deal with in terms of being respectful to the older person. But so what are some other things we need to be attuned to? And maybe as we're talking, it would be great for you if you could also put your tips in for everybody else. So I'm trying to look at the chat now, and there seems to be a question, but can you read it?
I can. So how do you get big ego younger attorneys, representatives to understand their own aged clients' needs? Had one recently where rep was hard-nosed to impasse and his aged and desperately poor client left sobbing.
So I'm not sure exactly about that specific example, but I'm also not sure that this has to do with the age of the attorney. So it could be any attorney that is may want to complete a mediation at a time when the parties or an older person or anybody else is exhausted. It could be an attorney that is not bringing into focus if this is an elder mediation or coordination, and not just attorney, but let's say any dispute resolution specialist that that doesn't take into account the needs of the people, regardless of age, that are in front of them, that make them feel minimized. We're talking now especially about their age. It could be because they're too younger and the attorney or other professional does not respect that they know enough, or it could be they're older and it's taken for granted that they are frail and just don't understand and recognize, you know, they may have a decision maker at the table that could really help with that. So again, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Brianne, but I don't think it is just a matter of the professional being older or younger. It's more a matter of the professional being tuned in.
I would agree with everything you just said, and tuned in, I think, is the right way to frame it. I'm sorry that happened, though, and that was the experience of everybody involved. It doesn't sound like anyone would want to experience that, no matter what their role was. We've gotten some really interesting and thoughtful tips that people are suggesting in the chat. A couple of them go along with some of the parts about some practical things that I was thinking about, and that's really being thoughtful about people's medical conditions and potentially pharmaceuticals they may be on. And I think going along with that, respectfully asking if a person has any sensory, whether it's hearing, vision, speech, mobility, or cognitive impairments that need to be accounted for. I think that's really important. And it can be something where, you know, you learn that somebody's hearing is perfect, because one of the things going into meetings with older adults or somebody who is potentially older is I often hear people speaking really loudly when a person may actually be able to hear just fine. And so I think getting those sensory needs as well as mobility or cognitive needs met is something we can work towards. I think being careful with the use of technology sort of around that and in general. And so, you know, I always have, whenever I'm with older adults, I have the ability to speak to them directly, to speak to them off of paper or hard copy materials. And sometimes even as a third way, I'm using computer for what I'm saying. But most of the time, I have all three modalities ready to go. I think that's really important to consider. And I'm sure a lot of people here are doing that. We also tend to use amplification, whether it's through microphones or other ways to make sound louder for those who do have hearing impairments or needs. You often learn about the need for an interpreter sometimes when you ask those questions, whether it's for language or American Sign Language. We also pay attention to the type and size and choice of font and choice of color for everything that we put in front of an older adult. Readability is really important. And so for the most part, if you ever see a document from me, 12-point font is the smallest font that I will use for almost any audience. But often I will be very, very, very careful to use only certain fonts that are very plain and clear to the eye, as well as avoiding colors that get harder to see with time, like the color red. And so whenever I'm putting materials together, those are things that I think about and direct my staff to think about. I also have people think about literacy issues. And I think literacy issues are touchy. Nobody ever wants to say that they have a literacy deficit or never, learned past a certain grade. But when we consider literacy, we are helping people and helping ourselves be more understandable and understood. And when we think about health issues, although it's not recent, one study found that our health literacy is in fact 4 years less than our greatest educational achievement. So if you finished 12th grade, your health literacy at best is likely on the level of an 8th grader. And so I think considering that, because many of the discussions that people have involve health and involve large terms, might involve acronyms, we want to be careful and mindful of different literacy levels. In that same way, we like to speak clearly and often facing someone if possible. That way, they are doing the same, hopefully back to you, and facilitating some very productive conversation. In that, too, you can observe caregivers and other individuals accompanying the older individual. One of the areas I also spend some time learning about and teaching about is elder abuse. And unfortunately, a great deal of perpetrators are caregivers or other individuals related to older adults. And so I think having a conversation where everybody is facing and you can be observant and everybody in the room can be observant is really important. And finally, that conversation and how the language is chosen for it is really important. I like to emphasize the use of person-first language. And so that would be when you use, the person and then maybe something that's going on with them, instead of using an individual's disability or chronic condition to lead how you might talk about them. So let's talk about Mr. Jones again. Mr. Jones may have, let's say, muscular sclerosis. And so we would say, Mr. Jones, he has, muscular sclerosis, but we wouldn't want to say like he is to lead with that fact. We would want to use it as part of how we talk about him as a person first. One of the ways in which you can learn more about, how a person identifies is to let them, tell you, what's important to them and how they would like to be approached. I think that's especially important in situations and where you want to be extremely culturally respectful and competent. I think when we're also talking about describing older adults, there are some preferred descriptions. Most of them start with older. So it's older person, older people, older adults, older patients, older individuals, persons 65 years and older, and the older population. Some generational descriptions are also helpful. We talk about people in terms of being baby boomers. Maybe they're part of Generation X, a millennial, Gen Y, Gen Z. Some of the less desirable descriptions are seniors, elderly, the aged, aging dependents. I see a term a lot that's the silver tsunami, and that's typically used to describe the large population of baby boomers that are aging into late life. And so you want to be mindful of those terms and any other terms that would serve to other an older person. For people of any age, talking about them as a person or an individual is one way. And then, using developmental categories, as I'm sure you do in your practice, for children 12 years and under, and then talking about, the teenage years, and then, for anybody who is 18 years and older is obviously an adult. And so it's a lot to take into consideration, but I think that those are some of the, practical considerations that can help us both involve the older adult in the action taking place, but also has a ripple effect in our lives and how we, are treating people with respect.
Yes, and I just see that in the chat.
Oh,
now.
Me too.
And right now. So one of the things that comes to mind, and I'll just give an example of myself, is how often I have used the wording aging person to denote somebody that's older, but a baby is an aging person. Correct. So we have to remember that some of the terms are really not implicitly talking about what we think it is. So being really aware of that. And also just want to point out that whether you're dealing with somebody older or younger, the kinds of things, tips that Brianne was just talking about really are pertinent. So if you are a parenting coordinator and you are working with younger parents and minor age children, you still have to be aware of the kind of wording that you use and staying away from acronyms, and not just acronyms, but like he, she, they, because it's stressful being in a dispute resolution process. The professional is doing everything possible to make it as comfortable and productive as they can. But, people are in the room with others that they may not have seen in years, or others that at that time anyway, they are not having the best, most easy feelings about. So if you're using sentences in which you're always saying he or she or it, they may not remember what you're talking about from one sentence to another. So better to continue to use the names or point to whoever you are talking about, so everybody knows and you're all on the same page. And again, that's with a youngest person that's involved, even a child, recognizing again that these processes are not always easy for them to be involved with. The other thing is that very often in working with families or in mediation practices that are involving parties who may not be related, you are still dealing with multi-generations very often in the process. And so that keeping in mind that these ideas, these concepts of ageism that we're talking about, and neutralizing that and understanding that we need to be mindful of all the people in the process without just thinking about these older people and how you're going to deal with them then, or younger people. That part is going to be really important. Showing it's a way to show respect for everybody that's in a room. It's also a way to be encouraging of the respect that they can give to each other, not to talk down to the person that's the youngest or the person that's the oldest because they take for granted they can't understand. And people understand in the capacity that they are able to. So being aware of that, using the vocabulary that will help everybody be comfortable. Those are things that are really important when you're dealing with the generations. I also want to point out that these generations are influencing each other, and if you are dealing with an older adult in a family situation, when they are coming in regarding issues regarding care or safety, be really aware that the social capital involved with having multi-generations in that person's life are huge. And often the alliances that occur and the battles that go on in court with these families leave them so splintered that by the time that they come to you, you may have grandchildren that aren't able to see grandparents anymore because of the infighting that's going on between family members, right? That they're allowing the conflict to consume the entire family tree. And how sad it is at a time when the older person may most need to see all of those generations, and the younger people most need to get to learn about that grandparent or great-grandparent, that those branches are so separated. So you hear me on my big box now being emotional about that, because this is something with elder care and coordination, for instance, that we see most of the time, but we see that very often in cases with younger families as well, because the parents are bickering and they're not allowed to see their extended family members anymore. We need to realize in all of these cases, young or old, It's not like the older people may not have put the buttons in place that are being pushed now, right? We know that sometimes what goes on in families has huge implications with what is happening later. It's just that if we are involved in some kind of decision-making process, we need to the best that we can as professionals understand all of the implications, everything that the family members are bringing in, just like we talked about in the very beginning. Everything that they think about age and every way that they have experienced the relationship with that person that may make it difficult for them to focus on the person at that time. So just want to bring up that elder caring coordination is a solution for some of these older families that are in conflict. It is widening the lens of dispute resolution. We're very excited about this. We hope that one of the takeaways that you get from this is helping families understand that there is this option out there, and helping the court identify older families that would really benefit from this process the same way that you would with younger families and family and parenting coordination, that sometimes those parents and those older families really need a process that is catered to the level of conflict that they are experiencing. So just want to point out that there is a website with more information on elder caring coordination, pretty easy to remember, right? eldercaringcoordination.com. We hope you look at that and you look at in particular, the video. It's only 5 minutes on the homepage, so you really get a glimmer of the process, and you can contact me about that if you have any more questions, because mediators make wonderful elder caring coordinators as well. So if that's something that you would like to talk about, just let me know. Anything else that you want to bring up now, Brianne, because we're getting very close to our closing time here?
Yeah, I think just to underscore that life presents a lot of complicated situations, emotions, and relationships. And I think that people think that once they make a decision in their life, or once they get to a certain age, that those things change and things get resolved. And life is a moving target and things evolve. And so I hope what we've done today is give some practical ideas for how you can address and meet the needs when people arrive with those complications and those emotions and the conflict at your doorstep. And I just thank you, because you've been contributing so many thoughtful things to our chat that I've been watching with one eye as I've been watching our slide with the other one. And I hope that this gives you some tools, like I said.
So I will just ditto. Thank you again for all of your comments and experiences and tips for everyone. It is really important in a forum like this that we learn from each other, and we're all aging, so we have a lot to share. So,
and an incentive.
That's right. So again, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.